Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we have reached the end of 2023, a roller coaster in the film industry with the strikes going on with the Actors and the Writers Guild starting and coming to an end throughout the majority of the year. A lot of the big blockbusters disappointing both at the box office and to audiences and critics alike, and just a lot of weird surprises, a lot of unexpected things that made my best movies of the year list for 2023. And I have 20 movies for you guys, along with some honorable mentions that I want to mention here before I get into the list. But this is going to be my personal list for favorites of 2023. And just a little preface, I've seen exactly 100 new releases in the year of 2023. And so I've probably seen a lot more movies than you guys have, or maybe you guys have seen even more movies than I have, which honestly, props to you if you've seen more than 100 this year. But I'm excited to talk about some big movies, some small movies, maybe some movies that haven't even released where you live yet. So let's get into the honorable mentions. We have Nimona, The Artifice Girl, Killers of the Flower Moon, Saltburn, The Iron Claw, which I'm very sad did not make my list, Rye Lane, Dungeons and Dragons was a fun as hell movie, and of course, Evil Dead Rise, which I was convinced that movie was going to make my list, but it was bumped out in the very last minute. So let's get into my top 20 films of 2023. And also, if you check in the description, I have my Letterboxd account where you can see me ranking all 100 films that I've seen this year in one list. So let's start off with number 20. I just absolutely loved this movie. And this is a movie where I really hope that it doesn't get overlooked by awards season, because Jeffrey Wright in American Fiction is just phenomenal. And yes, this is mainly a comedy if you've seen the trailer, but there are so many dramatic moments and the family drama in this film, and his chemistry with everybody involved in the cast is absolutely perfect. And Jeffrey Wright, this really is one of his best performances, and he's had a lot of great performances in his career, but somehow he has topped it with this one. This is also a directorial debut for director Cord Jefferson, and my God, what a confident directorial debut from this guy. And the writing was very smart. It's based on a book, I believe, but either way, this entire film was just a joy from beginning to end. Oh, Infinity Pool. This was one of the first movies that I watched at the very beginning of the year at the Sundance Film Festival, and of course it's stuck around for this long because, of course, me being a fan of horror, this was one of the best horror films of the entire year. And honestly, it wasn't even as much of a horror film as it was just a wild trip and a weird sci-fi concept that had a lot to say about its characters and about how you have this cycle of violence that you relive over and over and over again, how he gets desensitized to all the disturbing things that happen in this film. And it was just a really good movie. And Mia Goth being one of the highlights in horror in recent years is just crazy in this film. So entertaining. This is probably another one that I think not a lot of people have seen just yet. This movie is called Theater Camp, and if you were a theater kid growing up, this movie is probably the funniest thing ever or the most triggering thing of all time. And for me, I didn't grow up in theater, like I wasn't a part of the theater kids, but I was friends with a lot of theater kids, and I was in band, and the kind of dynamic you have when you're a kid in a sort of group that kind of accepts you for who you are, and you kind of gain this bond with all these people going through the same sort of experiences, and the humor that comes from that, the very specific intricacies that are only experienced by people who live these experiences. I think that is what I connected to most with this movie, even not having been a theater kid. And this is just genuinely probably maybe not the funniest movie of the year, but it is one of the funniest movies of the entire year. And the ending makes me cry. I don't know, there's something about how this movie ends with that final musical number that just, it really does get me. It's a very heartwarming story, and it's almost entirely improvised, which is absolutely insane. And before you say it's no, I'm not going to have just only independent films on my list. I'm going to have one of the greatest action movies of all time here on my list, and that is John Wick 4. And, I am a huge fan of the John Wick series. I love that first film. I think that has a grounded nature to it and a very character-based nature to that film. But there's something about this one in particular where the action sequences, yes, they're over the top. Yes, he's using suits to block bullets like just every other half second, but every single action sequence is even better than the last one, and there's some phenomenal, like, all-timer action sequences within this movie that get topped over and over and over again, to the top-down sequence later on in the movie, to the stair sequence immediately after that. It is just a non-stop thrill ride, and again, following this character for 4 movies, and this being the swan song for Keanu Reeves, hopefully as this character, I absolutely loved how this movie wrapped up. One of my favorite action movies ever. this movie really surprised me. I wasn't expecting to put this on my best movies of the year list, but I really love Bradley Cooper as both an actor and as a director with A Star Is Born, but honestly, I think Maestro is even better than his last directorial efforts. I absolutely loved this movie. And when it comes to biopics, specifically when it comes to musical artists, a lot of them can fall into the trap of, painting a picture of who they were to the public persona, like who their public persona was, rather than who they were behind closed doors. A lot of those movies, build up to the concert events of their career, or them learning like, oh, the music notes are going to go like this, and it's going to be my most popular song. This movie is incredibly just not necessarily uninterested in those ideas, but it's so hyper focused on Leonard Bernstein as a person, as a human being, and his relationship with Carey Mulligan in this film, who gives just an absolutely breathtaking performance in this film. I absolutely love Carey Mulligan, and she was phenomenal in this film, and her and Bradley Cooper bouncing off each other throughout the entire runtime was just a delight to see. One movie filled with some great performances, and yes, of course, there's going to be a scene where he is conducting an orchestra, and it is just an absolutely thrilling sequence in this movie. And the way that they use his music as a score to kind of paint a picture of his life using his own music is absolutely beautiful. I loved it, probably even more than a lot of people who watched it.
Y'all calling me crazy?
Yes, we're heading right back to the Sundance Film Festival with Polite Society. This is a film that, again, I don't think a lot of people have seen, but if you haven't seen this movie, definitely go watch it. Again, with the comedy and the humor that this movie gives, it is an extremely entertaining film. It is extremely over the top, and it is a very specific style and tone that the director absolutely nails throughout the entirety of this film. But the reason why it cracked my list is the sibling story that is in this movie with, the two main sisters of this film is so heartwarming, and just I related to it almost too much. It was almost a little bit too real for me, even with it being, like I said, an extremely over-the-top movie that goes in crazier directions than you can ever believe, when it kind of starts off as just, oh, this younger sibling has an older sibling who's getting married, and they feel like this relationship is never going to be the same again after this point in time. And it's not conventional really at all. It, subverts expectations in a lot of different ways. And again, like I said, the tone and the style and the fun nature of this movie is the reason why it has stuck with me all this time after watching it. Actually, I didn't watch it at Sundance. I missed it at Sundance, and I was upset about it, and I caught it when it finally came out. Definitely go seek this one out. I think it's on some streaming service. Go watch it.
The Holdovers.
I absolutely loved The Holdovers. It is such a comforting movie. I've seen a lot of people explain it as like a warm hug or a warm blanket that'll just keep you all warm and cozy over the winter holiday. And honestly, in terms of Christmas movies, this one is so comforting that I can easily see myself watching this every single year. But it's not just, a Christmas movie. It's a movie about these three characters that are in very different points of their lives, but what they have in common is that they don't have family over the holidays, whether one of them, was kind of abandoned by his parents and stuck at school because they wanted to go off on their honeymoon, or you have Paul Giamatti's character who, he doesn't really have too much connections with his family. He kind of dedicated his entire life to his career, and so he doesn't have anybody else. And then you have Divine Joy Randolph, who, her tragic story about her son, passing away at war, and her being, stuck alone at the holidays without her son. It is such a tragic and heartbreaking story that she also has to deal with. And now you throw all these characters together trapped in this school, and you just kind of have some hijinks, some fun moments, and some great road trip moments, and some lovely just connections and heartwarming conversations and conflict and love, and just this family dynamic that forms with all these characters and this ragtag group just really connected with me. And like I said, and like a lot of people have said about this film, it's so comforting.
They like you.
In a year full of disappointing horror films, you can always count on A24 to have the best horror film of the entire year. And that's what Talk to Me was for me, because this movie just really grabbed me from just the premise alone, and through the entire runtime of this film, I was absolutely hooked. And it's not like the story was any more original than, a lot of the other horror films that came out this year, because honestly, the story in this film it has a lot more shared connections with something like Truth or Dare than I'd like to admit, because the story is kind of similar in a lot of ways. But what this film does that a lot of other films that kind of have a similar premise don't do is subvert expectations in the best possible way and take you on a character journey that is so thrilling, so terrifying, and absolutely gripping from the first moments that you see them use this demented evil hand, and honestly did something that I didn't expect, which is make me kind of want to try it, because not everybody that uses the hand gets, terrible things happening to them. A lot of them do, but it also looks kind of fun, and it's a really great metaphor for drug use, which I don't know what that says about me wanting to try this demon hand. But either way, this movie is extremely entertaining if you're a fan of horror. It is gruesome in just the right ways, and like I said, it is genuinely thrilling and scary. All right, the first half of the Barbenheimer phenomenon has reached the list. Number 12 is Barbie. I absolutely loved this film. This is one of the most purely entertaining films of the entire year. You cannot deny the comedic perfection of Ryan Gosling in this film. It's maybe not my favorite comedy of the year. I think I have two more films that I think are above this that are very comedic in their own different ways. But honestly, what Greta Gerwig did with taking an IP, an established thing that you would think of hearing a movie about Barbie would go in a certain direction, and again, subverting all expectations and doing something that honestly Mattel and the studio probably should not have made on paper in a lot of different ways, but I'm glad they did. I'm glad they took the risk they did with this movie, because this movie has a lot to say. It has so many unique, directions that it goes in. The production design, the script, the direction, the performances. Margot Robbie is perfect as Barbie. I can't think of a different actress that would do a better job in this role than Margot Robbie. And, honestly, I don't really have too many negative things to say about this movie besides maybe a couple of goofy things with, Mattel and the whole Will Ferrell thing in this film. But honestly, it's just one of the most purely entertaining films of the entire year. And like I said, with its messaging in this film being as strong and as effective as it is in this film, along with just the purely entertaining nature of this being a big Hollywood movie at the same time, a lot of movies don't get that balance, and the Barbie movie from Greta Gerwig absolutely captured that balance. All right, let's talk about a more controversial pick from my list with Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. This movie I haven't seen on anybody's best movies of 2023 list yet whatsoever, and I've even seen it on one worst of list, which I honestly, I get it if it's, a disappointing movie for you if you're a huge Wes Anderson fan and you don't see this as highly as some of his other films, which are all phenomenal. I don't think this is in his upper tier of Wes Anderson films, but it was still a great movie, and honestly, in terms of comforting films, both this and The Holdovers were very comforting to me for whatever reason, whether it was the production design or the color of this film or the performances, the more low-key manner of speaking that everybody has in this film that is very Wes Anderson. I absolutely loved the ensemble in this movie, and honestly, with this movie being just above Barbie for me, Margot Robbie gives a better performance here in just that one scene than I think in all of Barbie. And I loved Margot Robbie as Barbie, as I just mentioned. So I don't know, this movie all around for me was just really comforting, really funny. And that alien scene is probably the funniest scene for the entire year. All right, so we've reached the top 10 films of 2023 with All of Us Strangers. Now, I'm pretty sure 99% of you guys have not seen this movie and maybe haven't even heard of this film. It's in very limited release here in Los Angeles, and I had to go see it because I wanted to catch it before the year was over, and I'm very glad I did because, like I said, it cracked my top 10. This movie is one of the most well-written and well-acted films of the entire year. Andrew Scott is phenomenal in this film. At its core, this movie is a love story between Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal's character, and in terms of movie relationships and romances that I've seen in the past maybe 5 years, this one is one of the best, just underneath another film that's going to be on this list. But I absolutely loved these two actors together. I thought their chemistry was off the charts, but that wasn't the relationship and the emotion of this movie that really hit me the hardest, because it's also a deep exploration of grief with Adam Scott's character kind of trying to write a story in his head of his parents' lives and how they would react to him coming out as gay, even though his parents died when he was very young, and so they never got to see his true self. They never got to see who he ended up growing up to be, and it's a journey of how they would have reacted to those sort of things if he was going to be accepted by them, and how they are going to reconcile their relationship, and how he feels abandoned by them, even though it was an accidental death and he feels like he should have been in that car, or any sort of thing that has to do with, him dealing with this grief in this film. And when it comes to the ending of this movie, honestly, I think this movie has the perfect ending. It is absolutely heartbreaking in the ways that you wouldn't quite expect it to be heartbreaking. And when it comes to both the relationship in this movie and the grief in this movie with the parents, but this movie just really did hit me hard. You would hear nothing but sniffles from the entire audience that I watched it with. It really hit us hard emotionally, and by the ending of the film, the final shots is easily my favorite closing shots of the entire year. All right, number 9, Godzilla Minus One. I loved this movie. Honestly, probably one of my favorite theatrical experiences that I had this year because the audience really dug it. I watched it in a Dolby theater, and so the sound design was just tearing through the audience. And in terms of expectations for this film, I had them pretty sky high because of the reactions that I heard from both critics and fans watching this movie saying that it was the greatest Godzilla film to date. But even still, hearing all that hype, it both met and surpassed my expectations in a lot of ways. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, finally in a Godzilla movie, in a monster movie, you're finally caring about the characters. But still, I wasn't expecting to be as invested and as wrapped up in the emotions of this story as this kamikaze pilot who feels like he failed his country. He's blamed by his neighbor for not doing the things that he needed to do to win the war, even though he's just one soldier being told by his government to die, essentially. And that's not right. And so this film is pushing back against what's happened in World War II on the Japanese side of things in a lot of different ways. And it's also kind of a reconciliation of them losing the war, as Godzilla has always been a symbol of the atomic bomb, a symbol of destruction, and how they're going to rebuild past this point. And it is a film about people coming together to essentially win a war, even though they have just been knocked down on their asses and they feel like they are trying to rebuild from the rubble, from the ground up, and to see this other threats now show its face directly in front of them and fighting against that is both inspiring and heartbreaking all at the same time with the things that happen in this film. All right, if you're a writer or an aspiring writer in any sort of way, you need to watch Anatomy of a Fall. This movie takes a fairly simple premise of a woman who is blamed for the murder of her husband and the only witness being her very, very young son who is blind. That is a fairly simple premise. She's going through a court proceeding of them trying to determine if she was responsible for this death or not. Is she going to get away with a murder? Did she not commit the murder at all? Is she completely innocent? And it really takes that idea and that story and just makes the absolute most of it with the writing, the direction, the cinematography, the way the story is told, and the performances within this story are all at the top of their game. And at its core, it really is a story, as the story kind of shifts perspective from the mother to the son of this kid has to decide. He has to make the choice of whether or not her mom committed the crime or not, whether or not her mom killed her dad, because when it comes to the court system, it's all about deciding what the truth is. You're never going to be fully concrete, and you're never going to know exactly what happened in the room on the day and the time of the crime that was committed. You're never going to see that. But you're going to have to decide based off of evidence and based off of testimony of what the truth actually is. And it all is pinned down to this kid. And I think this movie kind of explores this idea extremely well, along with having some themes in the background about how the court of public opinion can kind of weave its way into this trial that becomes very public and very intense in a lot of ways, and how that can be damaging to a person's situation, whether they are innocent or not. And I found the story to be incredibly riveting from the opening scene to the very last seconds of this movie. And honestly, maybe it could have ended a little bit sooner. I think I would have liked this movie to have been left maybe a little bit more ambiguous, but either way, I loved this film. All right, so let's talk about another film that I'm pretty sure nobody watching this video has seen, and that is Beyond Utopia. It is a documentary that I watched at the Sundance Film Festival. And if you don't know what this story is about, it essentially follows a family escaping from North Korea. And you're wondering, oh, okay, I don't know how that could be possible. How are they going to get the footage of all this happening? Well, it's crazy. They have to sneak cameras into the country of North Korea. You get to see footage that should have never escaped that country, with how strict and how secure that place is, and how harrowing it is for a family with very, very young kids, including a toddler, making this treacherous journey from North Korea all the way down to South Korea, and having to go around through all these other countries, making their way through all these different checkpoints where they could possibly be sent back to North Korea if they are caught. It is absolutely terrifying, and it's one of the most emotionally draining films I have ever seen in my entire life. And I think that's the main reason why it's not higher on this list, is because even though I said I'm clamoring to see it again, honestly, it's very, very difficult to watch, but it is so incredibly impactful. All right, this is definitely the last time I'm going to talk about a Sundance film in this list. So if you're sick of me talking about films that you've never heard of, I would highly recommend watching Radical, because this was my favorite film out of the Sundance Film Festival. This movie follows a school teacher who goes to a very underdeveloped school in Mexico, and he takes a very radical approach on teaching these children. Instead of the normal, like, disciplinary, forceful teaching that the teachers at the school kind of have, very much training them to the book and trying to have them, be as successful to be able to pass this test at the end of the year. He doesn't care about that test. He wants these children to learn whatever they want to learn and having them excel in their educational purposes in the way that they want to excel, and kind of engaging them in an entertaining way. And it is an extremely heartwarming film, while also having some very heartbreaking and dramatic moments throughout, where you're following this teacher who really cares about these children. And honestly, when it comes to teachers, they have one of the most important jobs of all time, and they're not paid nearly enough to be as impactful as they really are to the children of the next generation. And this film was extremely inspiring in that manner.
Oh.
All right, so we've reached the top 5 films of 2023 with, of course, Poor Things. This film is just insane. This is one of the weirdest movies of the entire year. This is one of the weirdest movies I've seen in the past 3 or 4 years. Yorgos Lanthimos really makes the most Yorgos Lanthimos film he possibly could have made, and Emma Stone is just phenomenal in this film. I'm sure you've heard this film mentioned in so many lists, and I've been dying to watch this movie again. I moved it up my list as I was working on it, and honestly, on rewatch, I might move it even higher up, but as of right now, it's at my number 5, because it's just one of the most entertaining films of the entire year that also has a lot on its mind in the way that it tells a story of society and how the world works through the eyes of somebody that is incredibly naive and doesn't really understand how these things work. And when she sees something that she doesn't like about the world, she's going to say something about it. She's going to do something about it. She's going to want to shape her reality in the way that she sees it, because she is new to life. She is naive in that way. And it is incredibly funny, with one of the best supporting performances of the entire year, with Mark Ruffalo playing this really vile and disgusting guy that is just so entertaining to watch on screen, because again, he is ridiculous, he is over the top, he is just off the rails in this movie, in one of the most unique roles that Mark Ruffalo has ever taken, that I honestly would love if he won or was at least nominated for Best Supporting Actor in this film. And really everything about this film I feel like should get some accolades at the Academy, whether it's production design, cinematography, costume design, performances with Emma Stone and Mark Ruffalo, hell, even Willem Dafoe in this movie is absolutely great. There's pretty much nothing about this film that I don't like. Yes, this is truly a list that is based off of my own personal opinions, because Guardians of the Galaxy is one of my favorite series of all time. I absolutely love everything that James Gunn does. He just has a way about telling his stories that just impact you both emotionally and just on a cinematic scale that is so incredibly entertaining, with the comedy in his films that just, it always worked for me. The Suicide Squad was one of my favorite films the year that was released, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is one of my favorite films the year that this was released. And I'm sure that Superman Legacy, or at least I'm hoping that Superman Legacy is going to be one of my favorite films in the year of 2025 when that film is released, because James Gunn just has a way to my heart. And I think the reason why this movie is as high up on this list as it is because it hit me so emotionally. Not the stuff with Rocky. Yes, the stuff with Rocky really did hit me emotionally, but as a story of this family that's been together for so many years. I grew up with the Guardians films, with Marvel in general, for so many years, and to see this as the final swan song for all of these characters, going off in a happy ending for all of them, it just hit me so emotionally, as the points that I am in my life, where I moved out from home and I'm on my own now in Los Angeles, and I felt like I was also on a journey saying goodbye to my own family. And so in a lot of ways, I related to this movie at a personal level that every single time I watch it, I am an absolute wreck. This movie just came out at the right time in my life to just really affect me and for me to really relate to it in a lot of different ways. And again, my love for the Guardians and my bias for James Gunn is always going to push him up higher up on these lists for me. And I'm a sucker for comic book movies. I don't know what else to tell you. Yes, there's a lot of comic book films that have not made this list because it was, let's be fair, a very disappointing year for a lot of them. But with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it just struck the perfect chord for me, making one of the most relatable movies of the entire year, one of the most entertaining films of the entire year, with one of the greatest endings to a series that I've ever seen.
Want you to stay.
And speaking of relatable films, Past Lives is a film that's, again, same thing with Guardians, it really did hit me on a personal level, which I think is what I can say about all of my top 5 films of the year, with, Poor Things, going to Guardians, now going to Past Lives. All these films impacted me in different ways in terms of relatability with the characters in the film, and this movie had one of the most tragic and heartbreaking love stories that is the one that I was mentioning when I was talking about All of Us Strangers. And when it comes to these scripts, when I was talking about Anatomy of a Fall, this script is so perfectly kind of weaves in this story that feels so real. These characters feel so much like real people because I feel like I've experienced what these characters have experienced in a lot of different ways. It was extremely relatable in terms of how I grew up in the relationships that I've had in my life. And as, the one who got away, that type of storyline that is so perfectly captured in this film in a bittersweet love story, it was absolutely just crushing to me. And one of my favorite films of all time is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And I think this movie, of all other movies, really captured what that film did with its love story in terms of the bittersweet nature of what love can be. And it does it beautifully.
7, 6, 5, 4.
All right, let's continue on with the personal bias. Christopher Nolan's my favorite filmmaker. Just straight up, I think between him and Denis Villeneuve, they've made some of my favorite films of all time. And Christopher Nolan came out with a 3-hour-long biopic about Oppenheimer, about the creation and the development of the atomic bomb. But it is so much more than that. I saw this film 3 times in theaters, and after the first time I watched it, you can even watch or go back and look at my Letterboxd review for this film, and even I think I did a full-on review for this movie as well, where I ended off saying that it's probably one of Nolan's best made films, but not one of my favorites, and I would put it pretty low on my ranking list in terms of, like, I like his sci-fi films more, I like his more original ideas a little bit more than his, like, war biopics that he's done between Dunkirk and this. But then I watched it in IMAX, and then it really clicked with me. And that last hour was absolutely thrilling. That was completely separate from the development of the atomic bomb. And it's just a court drama once again. And it was just so intense and so thrilling in a lot of different ways. And the script and the performances from everybody involved, in particular Robert Downey Jr., just really did capture me. And then I moved to Los Angeles, and I made it one of my first things to do was to watch Oppenheimer in 70mm IMAX at the Universal City Walk AMC. And my God, that movie in that format just really did push it over the edge to me, and it really grew on me as from becoming, the best film that I think Nolan has made on a, on a technical level. I think this is one of the most meticulously crafted films that it feels like he's been working his entire career to be able to do the things that he did in this film, accomplishing, a 3-hour-long biopic extremely practically, pretty much no visual effects shots or no CGI shots in this film, and all done in different sort of ways. I cannot wait to watch the special features on the Blu-ray as soon as I get my hands on that, because I want to know how they were able to pull off this movie. And again, the performances, Robert Downey Jr., Cillian Murphy was incredible, Emily Blunt is also phenomenal in this film, and even Alden Ehrenreich, extremely underrated in this film. But over time and after every single rewatch, this movie has slowly become one of my favorites Christopher Nolan films, and a filmography of his that I love every single movie that he has ever made. And at first, not necessarily being disappointed with this film, but being like, okay, it's not necessarily for me. And then all of a sudden, it's really clicking with me on second watch, and even more so on third watch. This movie has crawled up this ranking list throughout the entirety of this entire year that I've been making my Letterboxd list of favorite films of the year. And it has settled at my number 2 because it really is just that good. And I've heard that they're going to re-release this movie in IMAX 70mm again in January. And you know what? I'm probably going to make my way to one of those screens to watch this movie again in that format, because it is just that good. Of course, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is my favorite film of 2023. This is I don't know why, but I feel the need to defend this being my number 1, but this is my list. I love Spider-Man. That's really all I can say about this movie being my number one. I had a lot of high expectations for this film. And again, when it comes to expectations, it can either lead you to being either extremely disappointed, or if you have low expectations, you can be pleasantly surprised, or if you have high expectations and it passes that in every single way, it'll be your favorite film of 2023. And that is exactly what this film did for me on every single level, because it just took everything that the first film did and elevated it to a point of just making beautiful character arcs for Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy in this film that feel complete and whole despite it being a part one of two. And that ending is just like, God, that ending. And when it comes to this year having 4 movies that were a part one with a part two coming down the line between this, Fast X, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and of course Rebel Moon, which I haven't seen yet, which that one definitely would have made my list if I watched it. Definitely not. But still, we had 4 films that I can think of that were all part one with a part two coming down the line, yet Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse seems to be the one that was the most impactful in being a part one, because like I said, the character arcs were full and complete within this movie for the most part, and it leaves so much room to have fun and to explore in a sequel that will possibly either ruin this movie or elevate it to even greater heights. And in terms of a trilogy, if they stick the landing with a part two, this will easily be the best trilogy, like in decades, probably, in so many years. Like, I love so many trilogies, but I honestly struggle to think of one that would be better than this one. But that is it. The year is done. Those are my favorite films of 2023. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on both my list and your own list in the comment section down below. What are your favorite films of 2023? Am I crazy for the films that I put on my list? And if there's anything that I put on my list that you've either never heard of or haven't seen yet, I highly recommend you go check those out, especially these smaller films that I mentioned in this list, along with the big blockbuster films. If you haven't seen those just yet, definitely go check them out. But that is going to be it for me. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I'm going to have a most anticipated video later on next week, and I'm probably going to have a video on like some Oscar contenders that might include some films that I had in this review, along with some other ones that I did watch in the past week or two that I didn't get to talk about in this list. So definitely keep an eye out for videos here on the channel. But that's going to be it. Like I said, subscribe, leave a like, comment down below your favorite films of 2023, and I hope to see you all next year.